Did you know that in Greenland, people eat raw whale blubber? Or that in Mexico, ant caviar is a delicacy? Today, we're going to explore the 20 strangest foods from around the world. Some might make your stomach turn, others will pique your curiosity, and who knows, maybe one or two will even make your mouth water. Let's watch it. It's fascinating. Fugu. Usually, the biggest risk with exotic dishes is that they might be too spicy or not suited to everyone's taste. However, fugu is one of the few dishes that can potentially send you on a one-way trip to the cemetery. Fugu is the legendary and dangerously poisonous Japanese sashimi made from one of the most hazardous fish in the ocean. Fugu is made from the meat of the Japanese pufferfish, which, like other pufferfish, is incredibly toxic due to a potent poison called tetrodotoxin. While most pufferfish have this toxin in their spines, the Japanese variety, lacking spines, concentrates the poison throughout its body, making every part of the fish saturated with toxin. But if it's so poisonous, why eat it? Well, if the fish is carefully prepared and specific parts are used, it is possible to remove just enough tetrodotoxin to give a tingling and numbing sensation without causing harm. Thus, over the course of Japanese history, fugu has become something like the culinary equivalent of a high-risk sport. Because of its danger, only the top chefs in Japan are allowed to handle this type of fish. They must hold a special license that requires rigorous training, including some of the most challenging exams in the culinary world. Even with these high standards, there's always a risk that the fish might have more toxin than usual, and even the best chefs might not be able to properly prepare it. In fact, one of the few things that the Emperor of Japan and his family are absolutely forbidden from eating is fugu. To prepare fugu, the chef must carefully remove the fish's internal organs, especially the liver and ovaries, where the majority of the toxin is concentrated. Any mistake in this process can contaminate the meat with poison. The meat is then sliced very thinly, as thicker slices carry a higher risk of increased toxin concentration. Fugu can be served in various ways: sashimi, fried, or in stews and soups. But all preparations are equally dangerous since tetrodotoxin is not destroyed by cooking. If you want to try other strange foods, we definitely don't recommend this one. Balute. Here's an exotic dish that can unsettle even the most adventurous eaters. It's called balute, which is a fertilized duck egg, or sometimes a chicken egg. And you might wonder, what's so unusual about a hard-boiled duck egg? Well, these aren't ordinary eggs. They're fertilized eggs with a surprise inside: a cooked duck embryo. Yes, you heard that right. Balute is mainly consumed in Vietnam and Cambodia, but is especially popular in the Philippines, to the point where it's an important street food and deeply ingrained in their culture. To make balute, the eggs are fertilized and incubated for a specific period, which can range from 14 to 21 days, depending on cultural preferences. Balute is eaten hot and is usually served with a pinch of salt and vinegar. There's even a ritual involved. First, a small hole is made at the top of the shell to drink the liquid, which is described as a clear and savory broth. Then, the embryo and yolk are eaten together, often with a bit of salt and vinegar. Of course, it's an extremely controversial food due to its appearance and the fact that you're consuming a developed embryo with bones and feathers in formation. However, it's so embedded in their culture that Filipinos are unlikely to ever stop eating it. Personally, it gives me the chills. Haggus. No other food is as famously Scottish as this, and if you go to Scotland, you have to try it. And that's a problem because it has a terrible reputation worldwide. We're talking about the infamous haggis. You might wonder, what is this thing? Well, let me tell you about the ingredients and how it's prepared. The main ingredients are sheep or lamb lungs, stomach, liver, and heart, which are minced with onion, oatmeal, herbs, and strong spices like black pepper, nutmeg, coriander seeds, and a good amount of animal fat. This mixture forms a type of ground meat that is then stuffed into a cleaned sheep stomach and boiled for several hours. After boiling, the meat is removed and the stomach is discarded. Yes, it doesn't sound very appetizing, but those who have tried it say that the taste is surprisingly good, even though it may not seem so. It's one of those dishes that becomes an example of don't judge a book by its cover. In fact, some say it's a hidden gem of international cuisine that only the bravest dare to taste. Moreover, In one of those strange twists of history, haggis unexpectedly gained popularity in Japan in the early 2010s when a Japanese couple who had lived in Scotland brought it to Japan and opened a haggis sandwich shop that became a hit among the Japanese. Filipino lechon. The Philippines shares a lot of its history with several Latin American nations, as they too were conquered by the Spanish. As a result, their cuisine absorbed various elements from Spain, just like ours did. However, they decided to give some recipes a much stronger local twist, as is the case with Filipino lechon. Unlike Latin American lechon, which is made from pork, Filipino lechon is made from a rather different ingredient: crocodile. Yes, you heard that right. Filipino lechon has nothing to do with ham and resembles a dinosaur more than anything else. Strangely enough, the cooking techniques aren't very different from those used for pork. However, the skin must be removed, as unlike pork skin, reptile skin is too tough. So, unfortunately, there is no crocodile cracklings. Otherwise, the preparation is quite similar. The crocodile is stuffed just like a pig and coated with barbecue sauce before being roasted over an open flame, turning it periodically. The taste is different, though. Those who've tried it say it's a mix of chicken and fish, but with a firmer texture, more like beef. Would you take a bite of Filipino lechon? I certainly would. Giant isopod. In the deep sea, in the eerie abyssal zone, live creepy creatures that have adapted to their environment by growing larger to withstand pressure and becoming ferociously carnivorous or scavenging. Since no light reaches down there and plants can't grow, it's a dark world of predators. Apparently, some of these abyssal creatures are quite delicious when cooked with garlic, like in the curious case of giant isopods. Yes, you heard right. These abyssal monsters are as edible as any lobster or crab. With their abyssal gigantism, they offer much more meat than these crustaceans. And because giant isopods reproduce quickly and in large quantities, their populations are somewhat more resistant to fishing than common lobsters. They are mostly eaten in Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries, which have access to some of the deeper parts of the Indian Ocean, allowing them to trap these isopods using deep-sea traps. Some progress has also been made in breeding them in captivity, giving us the potential to create sustainable farms in the future. In terms of preparation and taste, they are not much different from common lobsters, almost tasting the same, except that their meat is a bit firmer. If you've tried lobster, you'll know it's simply delicious. So these little monsters are also a treat for the palate. To prepare them, they are boiled in water for a few minutes. Since they lack pigment in their shell, they don't turn red when cooked, but instead turn white. After the initial cooking, they are cut into quarters and sautéed in garlic sauce or butter. Oaxacan chapulines. One of the wonderful things about Mexican cuisine is that you can find all sorts of proteins: beef, pork, chicken, fish, and, well, let's just say this is the strangest and crunchiest protein you'll find in a taco. That's right. What we have here are nothing more and nothing less than tiny crickets, which are indeed entirely edible. We're talking about the famous chapulines. They're especially famous in the city of Oaxaca, but are eaten throughout Mexico, and in fact, November 29th is celebrated as Chapulin Day in honor of this unusual protein source. Chapulines are popular as a protein option for tacos, but are also eaten as a snack, not unlike peanuts or potato chips. Those who have tried them say they have a very pleasant and unique taste, described as an unusual mix of shrimp and pork rinds, easily absorbing the flavors of the spices and sauces they're served with, usually lime and chili. However, the texture is quite shocking as the legs are tough and spiky, so they need to be chewed thoroughly. I'm quite curious to try them. Would you? Huitlacoche. Some fungi infect plants and are a farmer's worst enemy. For example, potato fungus can easily ruin entire crops. But something very curious and delicious happens with those that infect corn, because unlike other parasitic fungi, these are not only edible but also delicious, often compared to high-quality mushrooms or even truffles. This fungus is known as huitlacoche and has been part of Mexican cuisine since maize was first domesticated, making its consumption ancient. There are hundreds of ways to eat it, but the most popular method is to cook it in oil with onions and chili and use it as an ingredient in quesadillas, tacos, and many other dishes. Initially, it was only consumed in Mexico, and in other countries, maize infected with huit lacoche was considered a pest. But gradually, the rest of the world has discovered the flavor of this parasitic fungus, turning it into a high-end restaurant ingredient. Nowadays, infected maize crops are more commercially valuable than regular corn. In fact, some Mexican farms are dedicated exclusively to harvesting the fungus, deliberately infecting the maize. Although its dark gray color can be a bit unsettling, the flavor is truly impressive, with sweet and umami notes. I've tried it and it's delicious. Would you give it a try? Blood clams. Recently, these clams have become some of the most dangerous seafood in the world, which is a shame because, according to some, they were among the best clams available. What we're looking at here is known as blood clams. They are freshwater mollusks found in the famous Yangtze River in China. They have the unique trait of evolving red blood, similar to ours, because their habitat has low oxygen levels, and they need more efficient blood to process the little oxygen they receive. Thus, they developed hemoglobin like ours, and this detail supposedly made them taste better than common clams, or so it was said. However, eating them became risky in 2021 when an outbreak of hepatitis occurred in a city along the Yangtze River. Sadly, the virus remained in the river ecosystem, where it was absorbed by clams filtering the water. Since then, many clams have become living reservoirs of the virus, making eating them carry a risk of up to 14% of contracting the virus. Eel jelly. One might think that the most exotic foods are only found in far-off lands, but some incredibly rare dishes can be found even in major Western cities, such as London with its eel jelly. Yes, you heard that right. Eel jelly. Here's the story. Before rampant urbanization polluted the Thames River, it was teeming with eels, making them a common food for Londoners. There was so much competition among eel vendors that an unusual recipe developed over time. Initially, eels were cooked in a spiced soup, but eventually Londoners discovered that cooking them for a long time in brine caused the fat and connective tissue to produce a tasty, salty jelly. So, rather than selling soup, they began selling eels in jelly form because it preserved them well and provided an interesting texture. Of course, today's tastes might find eel jelly a bit off-putting, but those who have tried it say the flavor is surprisingly pleasant, even if the texture is a bit strange. So if you want to experience the true taste of London, skip the fish and chips and try eel jelly, if you're brave enough. Stargazy Pie. Pies are one of those foods that can be made in 1,000 different ways, with all sorts of flavors and textures. There are sweet pies like lemon or apple, and savory ones like meat or chicken pie. But this one might just win the prize for the most unusual pie in the world. Just look at it. It looks like a cartoon with fish heads sticking out of it. This is the peculiar Stargazy Pie, which translates roughly to pie of gazing at the sky. It's a traditional dish from Cornwall, UK, and has a whole tradition behind it. According to legend, it originated in the fishing village of Mousehole in Cornwall. It was created to celebrate the heroism of Tom Bawcock, a local fisherman who, during a particularly harsh and stormy winter in the 16th century, ventured out to sea despite the storms to save the village from famine. By the grace of Providence, the fisherman returned with a huge quantity of fish and saved the village. The pie itself is quite simple, consisting of sardines or other types of fish with a filling made of potatoes, onions, and a salty egg and cream sauce, all placed on a pie crust. However, it is always topped with sardines arranged in the most cartoonish way possible, with heads or tails sticking out, and sometimes even little star-shaped pieces of pastry. It looks so charming that you might want to take a bite, if you like fish, of course. Frog legs. In much of the world, chicken wings have become one of the most sought-after meat snacks, famous for their spicy sauces and small bones. However, in France, they opted for a different and very unusual alternative: frog legs. Yes, it might be a bit shocking to most people, but if you think about it, it's a particularly interesting alternative to chicken wings. Frog legs have a similar amount of meat and a distribution similar to wings, and can be eaten in the same way. The traditional French recipe involves frying the legs in butter and adding parsley paste to give them a suggestive green color. Many French chefs have modified the recipe. Some bread the legs, others remove the meat from the bone and make what are essentially frog nuggets. Over time, various styles have emerged, though they are always accompanied by a green sauce. And this unusual food might have a future, as French-farmed frogs are extremely easy to breed in bulk. Who knows? Maybe in the future people will eat frog legs instead of chicken wings. I've got an idea for a $1 million venture. I'll make frog legs, cover them in buffalo-style hot sauce, and start a business called Buffalo Frogs. Tuna eyes. My grandmother always eats the eyes of the fish, and I always found it a bit off-putting. But it turns out eating fish eyes isn't that rare. In some parts of the world, eyes are actually a particularly appreciated part of the fish, as is the case in Japan with tuna eyes. In the land of the rising sun, tuna is one of the most prized fish in the cuisine. And we're not talking about canned tuna. Real tuna are gigantic predator fish that swim at speeds comparable to a torpedo. Catching a large tuna is no small feat, so every part of it is used in the kitchen, including the eyes, which are enormous, almost the size of a human hand. The most common ways to prepare them include boiling them in seasonings like soy sauce, sake, and ginger. This helps soften the texture and infuse flavor. They are also prepared fried or roasted, usually accompanied by teriyaki sauce or soy sauce, respectively. There's a myth that tuna eyes are one of the most powerful aphrodisiacs in Japan, but, as is often the case with such myths, it's more fiction than fact. Tuna eyes have a gelatinous texture, similar to other collagen-rich foods like bone marrow or chicken cartilage. The structural part of the eye is too tough to eat, so what's consumed is the interior, which has a surprisingly soft, creamy, and delicate flavor, to the point that many say, if well prepared, it doesn't even taste like fish. Like many other fish, they are rich in protein, collagen, and omega-3, so despite their appearance, they are surprisingly healthy, more so than the fish meat itself. So yes, Grandma was right about eating fish eyes. Chicken combs. Chinese and French cuisine have something in common. They make every effort to use every part of the animal to avoid waste. This results in some dishes that are, to say the least, quite unsettling to look at, like this one here. They are none other than chicken combs. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, chicken combs are eaten. Preparing this part of the chicken is an especially laborious process, as each comb must be meticulously cleaned, then blanched in boiling water to remove the tough, rubbery outer skin, leaving only the interior, which is a curious piece of muscle-free meat made almost entirely of connective tissue. This gives it an extremely soft, gelatinous texture, perfect for absorbing the flavor of the sauce it's cooked in. It's like a gummy, but made of meat. There are many preparations. In France, for example, they are cooked in wine along with various chicken pieces to make the famous coq au vin, incorporating them into one of the most renowned chicken stews in the world. In Chinese cuisine, on the other hand, they are stir-fried in a mix of wine, soy sauce, and chili to make a very popular appetizer. Eskimos. What you're looking at here are Eskimos, better known as Mexican caviar. Just like traditional caviar, it's a highly regarded delicacy often found in gourmet dishes, and it's also made of eggs. But that's where the similarities end, because Eskimos aren't fish eggs. But what kind of eggs are they then? Well, think something smaller, and with more legs. Yes, these are ant eggs, specifically from the Guijera ant, a species native to the arid and hot regions of Mexico and the southwestern United States. As you might imagine, ant eggs are extremely precious to the ants, so they hide them in underground nests. Harvesting them requires years of experience, not just to find them, but to extract the eggs. Plus, ants aren't too happy about losing their eggs, so collecting Eskimos means dealing with a colony of angry ants. That's why they are a luxury ingredient comparable to caviar. They are just as, if not more, difficult to obtain. Despite their unusual nature, Eskimos are highly regarded in the culinary world and are delicious. Those who have tried them report a mild, creamy flavor that melts in the mouth, similar to butter but with a unique salty touch that's found nowhere else in the world. Ackee. In most cases, eating fruit before it's ripe might just leave you with a bad taste and a bit of indigestion, but eating this particular fruit before it's ripe could be fatal. We're talking about the dangerous ackee. Originally from the rainforests of West Africa, the ackee fruit is not eaten there because it's toxic if not perfectly ripened. Instead, its seeds are used for medicine and soap making. However, during colonization, ackee arrived in Jamaica and surprisingly became an integral part of its cuisine, to the point that it's eaten daily in typical Jamaican dishes. Only the yellow flesh of the ackee is edible. The black seeds and the fruit's skin contain dangerous toxins called hypoglycins, which, while not 100% lethal, can cause severe illness, leading to a syndrome known as Jamaican vomiting sickness, which is precisely poisoning caused by ackee. Ackee has a nutty flavor and is famous in Jamaican cuisine for its soft, creamy texture. The most well-known dish is ackee and saltfish, which combines cooked ackee with salted cod, onions, peppers, tomatoes, and spices. This dish is enjoyed both for breakfast and lunch. Ironically, ackee is extremely nutritious despite its potential toxicity. It's a good source of vitamin C, essential fatty acids, calcium, iron, and, for a fruit, contains huge amounts of protein. Muktuk. Extreme conditions create equally extraordinary cuisines. And in a land where nothing grows, food can be truly unusual, as is the case in Greenland, with the infamous dish known as Muktuk. For centuries, the native Inuit of Greenland survived by hunting all kinds of marine animals, from which they created Muktuk, a dish made from the skin and fat layer of these mammals, such as whales, though seals and narwhals can also be used. This food has been a staple in Arctic communities' diets for centuries, providing large amounts of calories, especially during the brutal Arctic winters when they're needed the most. The recipe is quite simple. Once the animal is hunted, the skin and fat are separated from the body and cut into manageable pieces. Muktuk can be consumed raw, boiled, or fried, although in all cases it ends up being a food that requires hours of chewing due to its chewy fat layer. The flavor can vary depending on the animal, but it's often described as a nutty taste with a hint of sea salt. Muktuk is not only food, but also an integral part of the cultural practices and ceremonies of Arctic indigenous peoples. Sharing it is an expression of hospitality and community, and also plays a role in traditional celebrations and rituals. Coconut worms. Coconut palms are truly miraculous plants, providing everything a person might need from a single tree. The coconuts contain electrolyte-rich water. The coconut itself can be eaten, the palm leaves can be used for roofing, the trunk is strong and lightweight and can be used in construction, and if you know where to look, you might even find some meat and protein in the coconut palms. Or rather, not precisely in the palms, but in some of their tenants. We're talking about coconut worms. In some parts of Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam, there's a type of beetle that lives in coconut palms. While the beetle itself isn't edible, its larvae have been an important source of protein for centuries, as they feed on the fibrous material of the palms, which is one of the few parts that has no other use. So they turn a useless material into food, and not just any food, highly nutritious food, as these worms are huge and consist of 90% protein. Yes, I know there's a big taboo against eating insects in the West, but for many cultures that depend on coconut palms, it's an invaluable resource. In terms of flavor, those who have eaten them say they are much tastier than they look, with a taste similar to cheese and eggs with subtle sweet notes. They are usually prepared fried in oil, or sautéed with spices, and eaten as a snack, somewhat like salted peanuts but strangely healthier due to their protein content. Shaco. In many parts of the world, fish eggs are a common ingredient. Caviar, for example, is sturgeon eggs, and in the world of sushi, salmon roe or ikura is a popular ingredient found in many sushi rolls. So it's not surprising that we use fish reproductive organs as ingredients. However, things get a bit odd when we shift from using female fish eggs to using the male fish's equivalent organ. Yes, things are about to get very strange. In fish biology, the female has sacs that produce eggs, while the male has sacs that produce sperm to fertilize the eggs. What you're looking at here are those sacs, and yes, in some parts of Japan, they are consumed with the same nonchalance as fish eggs. This is known as shirako. Shirako isn't eaten raw but is briefly cooked in boiling water before being served with soy sauce. It is generally eaten as an appetizer, though in some areas it's used as a sushi ingredient. Those who have tried it describe the flavor as very subtle and almost sweet, similar to cream. Kasum Marzu. This is one of those exotic foods that can really turn your stomach. It even makes other strange foods we've discussed seem normal in comparison, and not in a good way. What you're looking at is one of the most repulsive cheeses in the world, so notorious that it overshadows even the famously stinky French cheese. It's called Kasum Marzu, from the Italian island of Sardinia, also known as rotten cheese, or cheese with worms. Yes, that's what it's called, and you can probably guess why it's so infamous. Kasum Marzu starts its life as a type of pecorino cheese made from sheep's milk, which isn't unusual. But it's during the maturation process where things get truly bizarre. Like many other cheeses, it undergoes a long fermentation process. However, instead of using special edible molds, this cheese is matured with fly larvae. During the maturation process, flies of the species Piophila casei are allowed to lay their eggs in the cheese. The larvae that hatch from these eggs start consuming the cheese, producing enzymes that break down the fats and make the cheese extremely soft, and develop a unique flavor. I know it sounds like the grossest thing ever, but there's some method to the madness. The flies used for making the cheese have been specially bred for centuries, and their growth cycle is carefully controlled. They are completely domesticated and only feed on the cheese, so there's no risk of contamination with other germs. The larvae feed almost exclusively on fat, leaving most of the cheese and its proteins intact. Kasum Marzu is usually consumed with the live larvae, though some people prefer to remove them before eating. It is typically served with Sardinian bread and strong red wine to balance its intense flavor. Sometimes it's covered with a slice of bread to prevent the larvae from jumping while eating. Due to food safety concerns and the potential presence of toxins, this cheese has been banned by EU dairy regulations. However, it is still produced and consumed clandestinely in Sardinia and can be found in local markets under the table. So there you have it, the weirdest foods from around the world. Would you dare to try any of these? Here are two options that you'll surely love.